Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Smart Human Podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Meghan Rabbitt, who is an award-winning journalist and author of The New Rules of Women's Health, Your Guide to Thriving at Every Age. Meghan has written for dozens of national publications. She is currently an editor at Maria Shriver's The Sunday Paper, and she is incredible at translating complex medical and scientific topics into clear, actionable information. Today, we're talking about this incredible book, Research on Women's Health, advocacy for consumers in the medical environment, and so much more. So stay tuned. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Smart Human Podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with journalist Meghan Rabbitt. She is an award-winning journalist and author of The New Rules of Women's Health, Your Guide to Thriving at Every Age. She specializes in writing about women's health and wellness, and her work has appeared on so many media platforms and in national publications. So I'm thrilled to talk to Meghan today and share her process and about all her wonderful interviews and everything that came up with this book. This book is incredible. So hi, Meghan, how are you? And thank you for being here.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Dr. Cohen, for having me on. And I know you've said call me Ailey, but it's a thing I have with doctors. I sort of need to call you Dr. Cohen.
Whatever you're comfortable with, I certainly don't care. You don't want to hear what my kids call me. So anyway, I just wanted to hold up this beautiful book. I actually tried to sort of get into the festive mood with the colors. But this book, when it arrived, I wanted to say this, it came overnight pretty quickly for our interview. And when this came in the mail, I literally thought it was a textbook for my kids' high school biology. And it was so interesting because I was weighing it and I was showing my family. And I thought to myself, this ain't no joke. I mean, this book is a lift, literally and figuratively. So I want to just jump right in. As a journalist, you've been doing, journalism for years. You've been a medical journalist and health and wellness journalist specifically over a period of time as well, not just general, right? Tell me a little bit about, first of all, how did you get this project? I mean, that's what's so cool too.
It is a really fun story. So I have been a health journalist now going on 25 years, actually. Wow. I started my career in New York in magazines and kind of worked through my way through the masthead at magazines. And then I became a freelance writer. And on one of those freelance jobs for Prevention magazine, I was charged with writing a story about women's brains, women and brain health, and why women are 2/3 the cases of Alzheimer's disease. It is really a disease that disproportionately impacts us. And so I interviewed doctors and researchers who are have devoted their lives to helping us understand why. And then as part of that piece, I was able to interview Maria Shriver and do a profile of her because she is a fierce women's health advocate and specifically in the women's brain health space. She founded the Women's Alzheimer's Movement, which is now part of the Cleveland Clinic. Amazing work that she has done. And so I interviewed her, I wrote the piece, and then she called me after the story came out in Prevention magazine, and my heart sank. I was like, oh gosh, fact-checking missed something. I must have gotten something wrong. And in Maria Shriver classy style, she said, Meghan, I loved the piece. And it led to me coming to work for her. And so
that's amazing.
It's been a true honor. I work on her weekly digital news magazine called The Sunday Paper. And about a year into working for her, she said, I want you to write a book for my imprint. We don't have a really comprehensive women's health book that tackles everything from puberty through menopause and beyond. We have this amazing resource in Our Bodies Ourselves, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners, female listeners, bought at some point or was gifted. Right. And it's an amazing resource, but it focuses on bikini medicine, right? What we now refer to as bikini medicine, gynecologic health, sexual health. And so what I really tried to do was cover more, so we look at brain health, immune health, heart health, all from a female lens in this book. So it was a big project.
Yeah, and what an organic, interesting story, actually, because it came from a place of passion and interest and opportunity, and it kind of all collided. And now you have birthed this incredible text, which really, having spent a lot of time, even this morning and last night and previous, trying to figure out how to angle this interview, I really just thought it would come out naturally because I'm so impressed by the sort of breadth of what you've covered. As you mentioned, our bodies, ourselves, the books that have come up to, this point in our modern day time, we have so much new information about women's health. We have so much, especially recently, right, with the changes with regulations to managing menopause and perimenopause with hormone replacement. So let's hear a little bit more about how not only you got the project, you're kind of gung ho, you're ready to get going. How did you begin to figure out the resources for who you were going to interview and vet them for not just the quality of material, but also their backgrounds and what they could offer for this project?
Yeah, it's a great question because when you take on a project like this, I felt really passionately about making sure the smartest minds and voices in the women's health space were included in this book. I also really wanted to make sure it wasn't just jammed with the latest research, because as we know, research changes all the time. What I really wanted was for this to be a narrative reference. You're going to read it like if you tuck into a chapter, hopefully I really aimed to make it conversational, easy to understand, but also filled with just a lot of background information that we can know about our bodies so we can best advocate for ourselves. So that was really my guiding light, my North Star in working on this is who can I talk to who can help me translate not only the new research, but just the background knowledge that most of us as women sadly don't get. I don't know about you, but my health class, it really left out a lot of key details. Yeah.
Generationally and even currently. I mean, I don't have daughters, but I have sons, and I'm glad to say they come back and ask me questions, but it also reminds me how less of information than they're getting that I was hoping they were going to get. And I think it's just because you have to keep it safe. You have to kind of keep it not controversial. You don't want to run into trouble with parents. And so, I feel like this is such a needed resource for even kids in high school.
Yeah, and
all the way through.
I agree. And I think, I've given an early copy to my sister who has 2 young daughters. They're in their tweens, my nieces who I adore. And, she is like, gosh, Meghan, we didn't learn this. And puberty is different now for my girls than it was when we went through it. And I need a bit more of like an education to help guide them through this big transition. I gave a copy of this book to my niece, Sydney, who just graduated from college. And she was like, Maggie, I had no idea the clitoris looked like this. And she is in a biomedical major. You know what I mean? Yeah. So like even kids who are going into sciences in college aren't getting this information about our bodies, and I think that needs to change.
I think given that, it almost implies that we really don't have as good a conversation with our own bodies, actually. And we don't have sort of the platform of anatomy in a way that makes sense or is comfortable. Women aren't typically used to touching their bodies, even young girls, in terms of just the stigmas of a whole bunch of, societal and cultural, influences. So, what this book seems to do is it goes from soup to nuts. And you can tell me more and tell our audience more, but you're starting with anatomy and some of the very basics, but you're drawing in so many other modern day issues like mental health, like the gut microbiome, like depression and anxiety, and using psychedelics and understanding what just the terminology of everything is, so that we have a ability to have a conversation with people that we trust and healthcare practitioners. Am I right?
You are right. And Maria Shriver, when she commissioned me to write this book for her imprint, she said, I want a manifesto, Meghan. And when Maria Shriver asks you to write a manifesto, you end up with a 700-page book and interviewing over 100 female experts. But yes, exactly, Dr. Cohen, that is what I tried to do, because even as a health journalist, I realized at some point during the process, gosh, like I don't know this. And no, I'm not a doctor. I never went to medical school, but I've steeped myself in various women's health topics throughout the years. And I was ignoring my own symptoms, like my own menstrual health symptoms, for example, like very heavy periods. I was very anemic and just sort of chalked it up to one of the bummers of being female. So to your point, we don't touch our bodies. We don't necessarily talk about some of the most taboo topics that maybe fill us with a little bit of shame, or things that society tells us we should feel shame about. And so education really is power. The more we know, the more confident we feel. Well, first of all, the more we can trust ourselves and our symptoms, right? And understand, oh, this might be something that's off here. And then the more confident we can feel when we go to our doctors and say, I think something is wrong and this is what's happening. We have the knowledge and the language we need to talk about our bodies as well.
Right. Language is so important because if you can't come up with the words, the questions don't come out as easily. And so you're sort of giving people a whole language to be prepared and armed for their consultations with doctors when they're learning more. And even in this book, you have a wonderful, section where you were talking about what are the questions you should be asking and how to ask and what to be thinking about, when you go in to see a healthcare practitioner of any kind to get something answered. You mentioned that you yourself had gone through some medical issues and that sort of led you down a different path of asking questions. Tell us a little bit about that story. And how, having gone through this book, where are you having gone through this several year journey to some of those same questions and concerns?
Yeah, I really realized that for many years I was ignoring a lot of my own symptoms, and I was doing the sadly common female thing of just saying like, I'll blame it on my hormones, I'll blame it on my period. It's just one of the quote unquote bummers of being female. I hemorrhage for a few days every month. Had anemia, turned out had a uterus full of fibroids, uterine fibroids. And so really when I really tucked into this book, I realized I have to start speaking in more specifics to my clinicians so that I'm sharing with them what's actually going on versus brushing it off. How are they going to know if they weren't feeling anything to run these extra tests? So I did ask some very specific questions. I got a vaginal ultrasound, and sure enough, I then had multiple appointments with surgeons to try to find the best surgeon for me to do this surgery, which it was looking like was going to be how to treat my case of fibroids. And you know what? In the process of this, a piece in the New York Times came out about how a lot of women who have hysterectomies don't actually know what organs are being removed. I interviewed Dr. Lauren Stryker, who's an incredible physician who has done countless hysterectomies in her day. And she said, you can think about hysterectomy a little like an a la carte menu. You can take different organs, you can do the surgery in different ways. And the more you know, if you're having conversations with your doctor about this thing, the surgery, the more you can say, well, what organs are you going to take? What type of surgeries do you do? What are my options based on the size of my fibroids and my uterus? So it was things like that. And actually in the course of doing this, interviewing doctors for myself, I talked to my mom who had a hysterectomy for the same reason, fibroids, they run in the family. And she said, Meg, I don't actually know exactly what organs were removed. She knows that her uterus is gone, but she doesn't know if she still has her tubes or her cervix. And that's pretty remarkable to me, So again, I think the more we know, the more we can ask smart questions and the more empowered we will feel, not only in taking care of ourselves, but in the care we seek out.
Yeah. And to your point, asking your mom that question, it kind of raised a, interest in myself with patients where I've heard over the years, and hopefully, my patients will share that this is not the case, but there's an intimidation factor that I think runs through all of medicine, that not intentionally necessarily, but the idea that the power, if it's like a power, not conscious, that the information resides in the healthcare field and healthcare providers, and it's very much slanted against sort of speaking up and bringing up. And, I was thinking about how I never wear a white coat anymore. I haven't worn a white coat in 20 years. And I think that just being on the same eye level and talking to patients on the same eye level without a coat, in my mind, is a metaphor for sort of distancing and authoritarian kind of discussion. It makes me wonder how we're doing medicine these days. Should doctors be incorporating, a different power alignment? Should they be using AI in conversation with the two of us, having a third party to weigh in a way? It's just a very interesting time, but the power interest is interesting to me. Did you get any sense of that with all the interviews that you you took on?
Yes, I think the resounding message I took away from all of my interviews was that doctors really do want to help us.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talk about medical gaslighting and
Mm-hmm.
women being dismissed. And I don't want to discount that. It happens, right? But I
Mm-hmm.
found that a lot of, particularly, you know, women's healthcare specialists, they want to help us. They really do. And we can help them as patients help us. We can help you help us. So one of the big takeaways, what I do differently now before any doctor's appointment is I treat it like my own little story of myself. I tell a story of my health, of what's been going on. But to do that, I need to do a little self-reporting. What's happening for me? What are my symptoms? How do I feel? And then I organize them in level of priority, right? Because you doctors don't have all the time in the world for us. I could probably talk for 2 hours to you about my various, concerns, but you might have 20 minutes with me realistically. And so if you organize your concerns in a level of priority, you get a chance to tackle what is probably most important, even from your doctor's perspective, and just feel better walking away, like you're getting more cared for, And so I think that is something that we can all do to help you as clinicians help us.
Yeah, with any meeting, I try these days to have a list of maybe a top 3 to 5 objectives of what I need to get out of that meeting so that I walk out without regret, that I didn't cover the material or I didn't get what I needed from any meeting. So it's almost like reframing your healthcare visits as a meeting to discuss what is going on and what your choices are and where to take it from here. So, and it adds more power to the consumer, I think, in what you're describing. Tell me, when you were talking to so many leading experts, and you were really kind of, listening on such a, informal way, right? It was a great conversation. You probably had such a unique experience. What surprised you the most from some of these conversations?
I think overall, it surprised me how often I was surprised. I'm a health journalist. I've been at this for 20 years. And the more I tucked in, I was like, gosh, I don't know this. And if I don't know this, there's a really good chance other women don't know this. So that's kind of number one. I feel like it started with anatomy. So I spoke to a number of female anatomists who are on a mission for us to stop using anatomical eponyms, which are anatomical terms named after the usually white male who laid claim to that body part. So there's an old Italian priest whose last name is Falloppio. That's why we call them the fallopian tubes. And
really?
Yeah, isn't that amazing? And so now there's this group of female anatomists who say, no, the toponym is uterine tube. And actually, and there's a number of examples throughout the body, and if we use toponyms, it cuts down on cognitive load for our medical students and other healthcare clinicians learning these body parts. And so you're better able to learn them. And also, it's a new way of being more progressive about talking about women's bodies, which is, let's face it, necessary. That was really surprising to me. I interviewed a urologist, who said, a lot of the old wives' tales, maybe not even old wives' tales, but a lot of the old advice we've been given about how to prevent UTIs, which is a common concern for a lot of women and becomes even more common as we get older and hit the menopause transition, like peeing right after sex, like wiping front to back, may not move the needle as much as we think they do. And in fact, it prevents us from talking about what we should be talking about when it comes to UTIs, which is vaginal estrogen and how effective that treatment is for the prevention of UTIs. And so I thought that was fascinating. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been peeing after sex for all my life since I've been having sex, and maybe I haven't needed to,
Yeah.
So little things and then bigger things. Another big shocker for me is breast health. A lot of us think that when it comes to breast cancer prevention, if we're getting our annual mammogram, that's good enough. But when I talked to Dr. Lisa Larkin, she said, mammograms are an amazing screening tool, but they're not breast cancer prevention. And most of our doctors are not actually talking to us about our lifetime risk. We can be doing a lifetime risk assessment. And so even doing something like taking the Tyrer-Cuzick lifetime breast cancer risk assessment online yourself, bringing those results to your doctor and saying, hey, I took this test. Can we go over it together and really assess whether or not my breast cancer prevention plan is right for me? So things like that are just were very eye-opening for me.
Yeah, and especially I'll mention breast cancer prevention. I post a lot on this as well because I myself am, strong family history of breast cancer and understanding how dense breast, which is another one of these findings that most of us hear about when we get our mammograms. It turns out dense breasts are supposed to thin out from, teenage years into our adult years, and they're not thinning out. There's a lot of question about environmental chemicals being a component of this. I've had some specialists on myself. And what's interesting is when the guidelines don't match what the science is saying. And I found that with breast health, particularly because when you have dense breasts, mammos once a year that don't see breast cancers as clearly as they should, right? Because it comes up opaque or white, really warrants an ultrasound to balance that information out. And that's something we're not often getting across the board from all, women's, healthcare prescribers. So
Yeah.
I just think that when you start to give people back, like you said, the information to ask the right questions, to get the scales, to get the scores that you want to have in those conversations, it actually changes your destiny, your health.
Totally.
So and these are critical decisions, right? These are
They
critical
are.
information.
Critical information,
Yeah.
and also information that we're going to have to open the book on at multiple times in our lives, right? And so I feel like, again, coming back to this book where it's a thick book, it's like a textbook, right? But my
Yeah.
goal is that you'll want to just keep it on your shelf. And then, I've given this book to my husband before my mammogram because I say to him, I have dense breast tissue. I'm probably going to have a follow-up sonogram. I need you to be able to support me in a way
Right.
that starts from a baseline knowledge. I gave it to a friend of mine, the breast health chapter, before she had to get a biopsy, which is also really common. Our breasts get lumpy, and a lot of times we're immediately like, oh my God, I have cancer. A lot of times it's not cancer, but you want to know what you're in for when you go through that biopsy. And she said, she met with a breast specialist. It was one of the highest compliments I've gotten on the book thus far. She met with a specialist, and she said the specialist's eyes were kind of like twinkling, like, oh my God, you know so much background that we can have a more productive appointment. And that just felt like that's my goal, is that if we come into these appointments with knowledge, our practitioners' eyes will sparkle a little and be like, gosh, you're informed with evidence-based information. And now the sky's the limit on what we can cover.
So jumping into up until this point, in terms of the research, most research has really been biased towards the male body, right? I mean, in general. And so, a lot of what we're finding out now is that men and women's bodies don't work the same way. I mean, in fact, even the way medications break down in the human body is very different. These are even court cases when people take certain medications and then they drive erratically and cause, some kind of damage. They've actually brought this even into the science of, legal situations. So, the idea that we're not the same, women and men are not the same physiologically on so many levels. How did that play out into what you were covering in terms of our historically biased, research?
Yeah, it really was another driving force in the reporting of this book, which was to say, okay, so if I'm going to write a health book for women in particular, I need to cover what we know, what we have finally started to learn about some of those differences. So we're finally starting to learn differences in the female brain versus the male brain, the female heart versus the male heart. There's still plenty of research that needs to be done, and plenty of areas where we just don't have enough research yet. But I figured where we do have an understanding, let me highlight those factors that do differentiate us. Again, so at least we've got this baseline of like, okay, I know more is needed, but at least we're getting somewhere. So yeah, I mean, in brain health, I interviewed Dr. Lisa Mosconi, who is, it's remarkable. She studies the female brain and estrogen in particular in the brain, estrogen activity. And she went to do a study on estrogen, and she wanted to know, well, what receptors, how many estrogen receptors are there in the brain? And she was like, this was just a few years ago and nobody had asked the question yet. And so she had to start further back than she was anticipating she would have to start, because she had to do that initial research on even finding out something as basic as that should be as basic as that. So yeah, we got a ways to go. I think that was my big takeaway. We've come a little ways, but we have far to go when it comes to studying the female body.
But it turns out now's a really great time to have this book and to have, women's, we have this whole movement and the conversation is open, I should say. This is a lot of it is when the culture hits, right?
Yeah.
But we have a real opportunity across the board to discuss new science that's come out, that's generally pushing the needle forward in terms of where the research dollars are going to go. And certainly now we're going to have more of an opportunity, I would hope, to study these differences between men and women and just women in general, and how they age independently of, any research bias from the past. You cover in the book a lot of different interesting topics, as I mentioned, but you cover pain management, pain control. I think that's really unique and interesting, especially now since we have some mixed messages on Tylenol during pregnancy, for example. Understanding some of the safety issues. I'm just curious. Did you find that women's pain in general isn't often taken as seriously as, say, men's pain? Do you feel like that concept of hysteria was kind of infiltrated throughout the system? Did you hear from some of the experts about their perception of women's pain levels versus men? I'm curious.
I sure did. And that was a sort of sad to me. I thought maybe we would have come a little bit further. And yeah, women's pain has historically been ignored, and frankly is still being ignored to some extent. Women, it's like, oh, you're so emotional. Our hormones get blamed. Oh, it might just be like you're so hormonal right now, which is crazy considering men have hormones too. Why don't they blame, their behaviors or whatever on their hormones? But yeah, and the interesting thing about pain, the more I tucked into it, is that if we don't treat pain, it tends to get worse. Like our sensitization to pain skews in the way we don't want it to. And so treating our pain is really crucial, I had a doctor tell me that what she recommends women do is compare your pain to something concrete. Like my stomach hurts to the extent that my knee hurt when I tore my ACL skiing. Be really specific so that you try to put it into a context that no matter what, someone might understand a little bit more.
I think that's brilliant, actually. I think that's really smart, because I was just talking about having a bee sting on my foot that was more painful than giving birth. I mean, so that right there just set the tone for how painful that moment was, and really felt like I was in control of those comparisons instead of giving it to someone else to make their own personal judgment about comparisons for pain. So I actually think what you said was smart too. I think that's a really great concrete way to walk into an appointment, is to really also have control over your own perception and analyze it that way.
One other big aha about pain was when I interviewed Dr. Vonda Wright. She is an orthopedic surgeon. She sits at the bedside of women in a lot of pain. They have just broken a hip or another bone. And she says women often wear our high pain tolerance like a badge of honor. She says she can't tell me the number of patients who come to her like, I've got such a high pain tolerance, I'm all good. And I really resonated with that, because I used to be that way. I think after my hysterectomy, I was very compliant with the pain medication protocol that my surgeon recommended, whereas before I might have been like, no, I'm fine. I can go without the extra strength Tylenol, as sort of like this badge of honor or this ego thing, where really, oh no, we need to treat our pain. We shouldn't be wearing that high pain tolerance as such a point of pride.
That's interesting. And I think anthropologically, women have always had to manage their pain in order to survive, to nest, to build families, to do labor and work that has to get done in order to survive, or the family to survive. So I feel like there's some kind of built-in stoicism, like you said. When my husband gets a cold, it's like, okay, all right, it is the joke, and that's why it's funny. Actually, that's why everyone laughs at that joke, because there is sort of this sense that women can take more pain than men because they've been doing it for millions of years. The question is that necessary? Is it necessary to kind of, like you said, wear that badge as if it's an important thing to share, instead of really being vulnerable and getting care that you need?
Absolutely. And one of the things that made me so hopeful in talking about pain, actually, when it comes to gynecologic pain, is we're finally, and I think young women especially, are finally talking about pain as it relates to IUD insertion.
Yeah.
And how we just brushed it off, no big deal. Oh, you'll be fine. Yeah, it'll be a little sore. Oh my gosh, no, no, no. And in fact, I interviewed a gynecologist who said she tried to get an IUD with no pain management after she had a baby because, you're always told, oh, after you have a baby, it'll be so much better. And she was like, no, she considers anyone who gets an IUD without pain medication a magical unicorn. And so, but luckily we're talking about the options so that, women can go in and say, what are the options for pain management when it comes to this IUD insertion?
Right. And that's interesting you said that because that brings up a documentary called The Bleeding Edge that I saw on Netflix that I thought was excellent about the medical device industry. And they did a big segment of this. It was across the board talking about different devices, but they were talking about a specific brand of infertility coil that was used, and it's still very much used, but not as much. And all the women that had complaints individually of this pain. And there was a real pushback from the gynecologic world because there wasn't a consensus. There wasn't a class action, so to speak, of people coming together through the social media networks to actually band together. And then you saw how pervasive this problem was. It wasn't an individual issue. It was a pervasive problem. But it took such a windfall to really make people aware that this particular device had particular issues, maybe not in everybody, but certainly in a vast majority. And I think to myself, that's sort of like the power of women, getting together, being outspoken, getting your messages together and in line with no secondary gain, and really moving the needle on women's health. I thought that was just a really important thing from that documentary. But I'm sure you've heard this before from certain groups.
Yeah, and I love that. And I think it points to something that I think is another hopeful piece right now is that we are talking about our health and our bodies in big ways. And I think, frankly, women in midlife, in the menopause transition at some stage, whether in perimenopause or in menopause, are like, we got to talk about this, ladies. And it's amazing. Like, I can't go anywhere. I don't know about you, but I'm 46. I can't go anywhere without having a conversation with women my age about perimenopause or painful sex or dry vaginas. And we are talking about all this stuff like with the men at the table. And I think that's amazing. These are conversations my mother's generation were not having. And the more we can talk about these formerly taboo topics, the more we normalize it, right? And we don't feel so ashamed to talk to our doctors when we're in that flimsy paper gown. We can actually say, sex has been painful. Do you have a treatment? And we can get treated for this rather than power through.
Yeah, it's crazy. I actually joke around a lot about perimenopause, and I started to joke around in front of men about it. And wouldn't you know it, they're laughing too, as if they're living it too in some way, whether it's their family members or what have you. But it's like you said, it's become a normalized conversation, or it's becoming more normalized to talk about this stage in life and to validate some of the very uncomfortable parts of it, and making sure that it's actually taking, seriously. So other topics in this book that I wanted to talk about, you cover eating disorders, you cover mind-body connection, you cover clinical trials, which I was thrilled to see, that you talk about people who get involved with clinical trials, maybe some of the things they should know. I teach that to my patients because I went through those years of training, and there are important things to know about a clinical trial that everyone should be aware of. So you don't sign your rights away without understanding what you're getting into. Yeah. That was fascinating. You put that in the book. What made you do that?
Honestly, I feel like I, as a women's health journalist, have for years been reporting on we need more research. And so I feel like any chance I can join a study where it works for me, I try to. I'm part of the Wisdom study right now, which is a big, amazing breast health and breast cancer prevention study. And every time I get a mammo, I upload it to that portal. It's very low maintenance for me. It feels like low hanging fruit. It's easy enough for me to do. And if me participating in studies can help my nieces have better understanding about their breast health, like, why would I not do that? And I feel like I would love to spread the word about at least having a conversation with your doctor. You can bring it up with your doctor and say, hey, okay, so I have this autoimmune condition. Do you know of any studies I could join that could, not only potentially help me, but potentially help what we know about this autoimmune condition?
Yeah, that's a great point. You're looking at it from an altruistic, let's women help women. I actually am more jaded, and I often say, well, let's make sure that when you get into a trial that your privacy is protected for what you want, and that you're not undergoing procedures that you can't bow out of. And there's a lot of that, but balancing while still moving the needle forward on scientific research is really where, you land. And I think that's really important because we want to continue research. Research is great. Well done scientific research, I think, is missing and may even not get funded as we move forward in some areas. So we really need to, support that as well. You were talking about even how to speak to the billing companies or how to speak to the costs of healthcare. So that was kind of cool to see in your book. Another area of empowerment that I love to see, or in education and empowerment.
Yeah, and another area that we don't talk about enough,
Yeah.
right? It's like, gosh, if you get a medical bill, it can be a nightmare to try to navigate the system and really figure out what you owe, to double check things, codes and things like that. And so I wanted to give readers at least a little bit of a background to say, look, here are your rights. This isn't going to go to collections right away. You've got a little bit of time to think about and to check the work and think about what your next step forward is. And I felt that was really important, because in addition to knowing what we need to know about our bodies, we also need to know how to navigate the healthcare system that's taking care of our bodies.
Yeah, I think that's important. That's the whole continuum of empowerment. You're giving women in different areas of this, whole conversation of health and well-being and disease prevention, things that can, even negotiating bills is being able, even knowing that you can negotiate with a hospital system, potentially, or working with your, insurance to see where you can find some happy medium. I think that is something that most people don't even assume, just like, when they hear from doctors that this is this, they don't know there's flexibility. There might be subjective, ways to get better answers and second opinions and third opinions. And I think that's really important, is that it's not always one opinion from one person that should a decision make, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And let's face it, it's often the women in the family systems that are making those calls, that are making the doctor's appointments, that are making the follow-up appointments to get a second opinion, that are calling about the medical bills, And so I think it's really important for women in particular to have this information, because we tend to be the ones to take the reins on these decisions for our families.
Yeah, for sure. And even spouses and that kind of thing. Women kind of make those decisions not only for what food people buy for their homes, but really how do you keep up with just health maintenance?
Oh, yeah. That's why married men live longer, right?
Yes. Yes, they live longer and women live shorter. Than when they are married. But it's and that too is a very funny joke. But it's not really a joke. These are the numbers that we're seeing because women caretake, and that's innately part of their system. But they don't always take care of themselves.
Oh, totally. And that was another big takeaway for me personally after interviewing multiple doctors and researchers for this book and other clinicians, is that women in midlife, we have a really unique window to make changes that really will pay off later, and I'd say even, certainly anything you do in your 20s, your 30s, but tends to be in your 40s, your 50s, you sort of like, maybe your annual gynecology appointment, hopefully you're going to, but like oftentimes I've heard a doctor say the dog gets more veterinarian appointments than you do. And so it's right. A lot of people can relate to this, but it's like, gosh, the changes you make now will pay off later for your heart health, for your brain health. The more you can get into an exercise routine now, eating healthy, doing an assessment of all these chemicals we're exposed to try to be like, okay, what can I do to make changes that will pay off later, I think is another, hopefully when you get this book, you're going to be like, okay, what's the lowest hanging fruit for me? What can I do that's going to have the biggest payoff later on? Because that's the thing, these lifestyle habits that we hear about a million times, like they really do work.
So, and to your point, when you do things up front to have payoff down the line, I myself, have felt, just so much messaging on social media, which I have to live on for the work I do. Most people have accounts on social media, Instagram, they're seeing videos And once you look at a video, you're going to get 100 more of the same category just because that's the way social media is programmed. So you end up almost getting like emotionally, or at least I'm speaking for myself, emotionally abused if you're not on HRT or hormone replacement therapy yet. And then you're like, oh, there's a window. I have to get it on, get into this. And then what about there's such, or even younger people like even my kids who get told that, at 16, they need to watch for wrinkles, or they have to worry about, their skin being soft. There's such an inundation of almost fear tied very much into product endorsements and, buying and purchasing. I want to know, as a journalist, how do you meter that out? I mean, how do you even meter out, even within the conversations you had with women that were excellent and well trained? How do you meter that out when you talk to people and how you've written this book?
Yeah, I do something, and it's recommended for all of us to do something called lateral reading. So if I see a piece of information, what I do is open up a new browser and multiple windows in that browser. And then I'm Googling the information I'm learning. I'm seeing if other sources can corroborate that information. I'm also looking really closely at the source of the information. Do they have any ulterior motives when it comes to putting out the information they're putting out? What is their training? What is their background? What is their qualifications to be giving me this information? And it's something, there's a whole section in my book on how to suss out health information, because it's like you have to go through this information we're getting bombarded with, like a health journalist does. Like, what can I trust? And these are the steps I can take to understand if I can trust it or not. And also, frankly, there's a section in there like how to Google health symptoms like your doctor does, because our doctors are using search tools just like we do. They just have more education when it comes to what they can trust versus not, when it comes to the physiology and the research and the medical aspects that I certainly don't have, because I never went to med school like you did. And so, doctors even will give you tips on how they look for information that they might not know on the tip of their, head, or whatever that phrase is.
Right.
So I think we can all do that, and I'm even a proponent of talking to your doctor about it and like watching her search whatever you're dealing with, and then just saying like, okay, what are you looking for? What's the information that you can just like forget about? And then what's the stuff that I can trust?
Yeah, so you're basically just covering your bases. What I would tell my 16-year-old, when you're getting when you're getting information, where is that resource coming from? Whether it's politics in his case, or business information, or anything. I think it's like you said, we have to still do our due diligence. We can't relinquish our brains to other people and to the internet. And it's interesting. I literally, for a year or so, I did not want to use AI for any reason. Okay. So I just was one of those, and I feel like I'm not alone in this as a physician, believe it or not, especially because I'm a little older than the newer generations coming out. But I just didn't really, I was almost in shame because I couldn't hold that much material in my brain with one question being answered. So there was a real stretch. I've started to prompt I think respected, kind of resources with my patients in the room. And I've been feeling that out. And it turns out that I'm getting more positive feedback from that than I ever would have imagined, as opposed to feeling like I'm wasting their money and time because now they could have done that themselves. But when we do it together, it's been really interesting because I'm prompting by showing them what I'm asking, how to do it, teaching them how to download. So what are your thoughts on AI being used, and what are the best ways that you have seen either physicians talking about it or you yourself as a journalist?
Yeah, well, the first thing, and this is also in my book, is that AI is biased, just like society is biased and sexist. AI relies on large language models that are pulling from sources that have historically been sexist, and left women out of the equation. And so know that going in, they are getting better, but have a little bit of like a healthy skepticism when you get the search results, I think also it's really important when it comes to your health, you can't just trust blindly what is being spit out, and likewise, you can't just let you spiral into the doom, oh my gosh, my life is over tonight, because you've gone a little bit too far down a rabbit hole on AI. I think really it comes back to, boy, you need to have clinicians, healthcare practitioners who you trust and who you can talk to. You can bring these health results or the search results to about your health and say, can I show you what I've learned here? Can you give me your take? Can we make a shared decision together about my next step forward? So that really, yeah, AI is great. And like healthy skepticism is essential.
Yeah, I don't think it's ready yet entirely, at least certainly on its own. But I think when people start incorporating it with either their healthcare, practitioner in the room, even if they were the one to initiate it, I think these are kind of going to be the way we're moving forward in a way that you want to be able to get all the information. And I will be honest with you, humans cannot hold a lot of that information and all of the specifics. And I think it's really useful. At least that's what I've seen. And I think that's where we're going to. But we have to be careful, right? Like you said.
We do. But you know what, Dr. Cohen, it's reminding me, I just had my annual physical and I think my doctor, she's amazing. I love my primary care physician. I wish a relationship like that on every woman. But, I think she was very present with me and she was taking notes, but I'm almost positive she spit all of what I said to her into some AI, whatever, hopefully HIPAA compliant, because my post-appointment notes looked very different than my last ones did. They looked a little AI generated. But I'm okay with that. Like a little recap of my appointment done by AI that allowed her to be more present with me in our appointment. Like that might be kind of a way that we see more doctors using AI, and it might not be such a bad thing.
Yeah, I find that interesting. And some patients are even asking for it. So, how am I going to take this information home? At this point, I'm like, well, it's our conversation and we're going to take notes, both of us. But technically it should save time and effort so that I could take away the time and effort so I could be more present, as you said, which is why I don't type while I'm seeing patients. I'm listening and then writing a little bit in between. So everyone's got their own style, but the world is changing quickly,
Sure
and
is.
Certainly health information and meetings are going to be very different. So a couple other questions that I'd love to know. This book is called The New Rules of Women's Health. What are these new rules? I mean, we talked about a lot of them. But I love the name because you're basically, it's a call to arms. These are the new rules. These are the things that we now have to pay attention to. Yeah. Besides agency over our bodies and sort of the surface stuff, what do you think? What are things you hope that people are gonna take away from this book?
Yeah, I feel like a friend of mine who's in marketing said, I love this title because it's not like the rules that we have to follow like punitive. It's more like, ladies, we've been letting other people, mostly men, make the rules for us for far too long. It is time to take it into our own hands. And really that is the goal with this book, is like knowledge is power, right? When you have this baseline knowledge about your body, everything gets better. The way you care for yourself, the way you get cared for, the care you demand from your healthcare practitioners. Maria Shriver has said to me before, I think we all need to become the CEO of our own healthcare. And I think it's really a great analogy. You think about big CEO energy. They're knowledgeable, they're confident. If they don't know something, they know who to talk to get the right answers,
Right.
the answers they need. And I think that in this day and age, that is a major new rule. We cannot outsource our care. We really do have to take it into our own hands. And I think really a big thing is like a new rule is that when you know your body, you can trust your body. You can trust your symptoms. You can trust the language, the stories you're telling about your body to your friends, to your healthcare practitioners. So that again, we not only get rid of some of these taboos that shouldn't have been in there in the first place about how we talk about our bodies, and also we get the care we need and deserve. So I think those are biggies that I hope people take away.
Those are big. Yeah, those are big and very different from when I was growing up. So I think this is really exciting. I even love how you put the expert sections in where you have the lists of doctors that you spoke to, that you as a journalist made this book very accountable, which I respect because you have tons of references that are beautiful, peer-reviewed studies, kind of the best of the best that support your points and the points of the colleagues that you are interviewing. I just think that it's beautifully done. And, I can't thank you enough for putting it out there. I mean, I was thrilled that you even asked me to write a little bit with you, or you wrote a little bit about our interview about, immune system.
Oh, yeah.
But, you have some of the finest, I think most thoughtful, colleagues in medicine in this book, and you really just chose so well. And your writing is beautiful. So
thank you so much. I'm really trying to take that in, and I appreciate you calling that out, because I'm an old school journalist, I'm 46 years old. I started in print, where you have to fact check everything. And so I hired professional fact checkers to make sure everything is accurate in this book. I emailed with every source included, to make sure that the information I captured from our interviews was accurate and represented the information you wanted to get across well. And so that's really my hope and my dream for this book, is that it becomes helpful, because we can make the best decisions for our health when we have facts, not fake, stuff that our Instagram feed decides we need, but rather real evidence-based facts, thanks to the work that clinicians like yourself have done for many years.
Well, I'm just glad to be a part of it. Where do you see, I'm sure you're hopeful, I think, about the future, because you're seeing such change, but tell me what things are making you perhaps hopeful, and where do you see medicine for women in 10 years?
In my dream scenario, we'll do so much more research, so that my little nieces they just have more information, like when they have heart palpitations or something going on, they don't get dismissed. They're like, okay, we know exactly how to treat you, because we know so much more about women's hearts. I am hopeful that young women will just be able to talk more about everything, whether it's their periods or sex or, symptoms, that once were considered just like, gosh, I can't say that because it's a little embarrassing, and that will just hold so much more space and have so much more information for women to help us not only care for ourselves and care for our families, but get the care we deserve.
Yeah. And live longer and healthier as well. Not just longer, but
totally,
healthier. So I think this is just really a great time. You couldn't have a better timing, I think, for this specific book with all of, 700 pages, my goodness. And, but really fun. It wasn't like a heavy read. It was just really interesting and fun and done really well. Where can people find you? Where can they find the book? When, tell us a little bit about pub date, and when is this book coming out and being delivered to the world?
Totally. This book comes out on January 13th, 2026, and you can pre-order, you can order. It is, you can find more information about the book at newrulesofwomenshealth.com. And you can also search me and find me on socials at Meghan Rabbitt. Rabbit like the bunny with 2 T's.
That's awesome. And this is not the last we're going to hear from you. Your career is like incredible when it comes to these topics and going where other people haven't gone. And I just, keeping an eye on what you're doing is going to open up lots of eyes and minds for all of us to benefit from. So, I'm thrilled to know you and be a part of your circle. So thank you so much for taking the time. Is there anything else you want to, finally, share as a final message?
Dr. Cohen, thank you for having me on. I feel like these questions were so thoughtful and, it gave me a chance to really talk about my passion for this book, which was really to get women evidence-based information about our bodies, because it's we need it more than ever before.
Fantastic. Well, on that note, thank you so much, Meghan Rabbitt, for being here, and really appreciate it. And I will be promoting this book as much as I can, because it's just so important. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cohen.